When I was a child I ate my pet goat. I didn't know at the time. My grandma said that he ran away. What are some cover-up stories your family told you as a child that you later on found the truth about? I had a dearly beloved goldfish from when I was about 7 or 8. His name was Golden Goldie. My adult sister was charged with taking care of it when we went on vacation. Of course it died under her care. I think she just forgot she had it. So as a cover story she told me someone kidnapped him and she couldn't afford the ransom. My parents played along for a while, finding it amusing that I actually believed her. They planned to tell me after a few days that he was dead. But before they could I called 911. Antics ensued. Calling a sibling's bluff. Always a good time. I grew up in hurricane and tornado country, with some pretty devastating storms passing through during my childhood. We moved when I was still a kid, and years later when I mentioned I never remembered the storms, my mom casually told me that because any time there was a storm warning, I'd get you kids to go play camping in the basement so you wouldn't cry. I did remember camping in the basement, which I always loved because it was the only time I was allowed down there and I was allowed to pack snack supplies. My family hates camping and it was the only time they'd ever indulge me, as the youngest child. Clever. That's actually a pretty smart way to keep kids calm and have supplies throughout a storm. As a child, my first pet was a puppy. He was brown so I named him Root Beer. We'd play all the time. He'd run away and I'd spend hours looking for him. One day, some bullies were beating me up, so my dog decided to pee all over their bags, thus stopping the fight. Fun dog and loyal to the end. Well, I ended up moving down south to live with my father, and his dog and my dog never got along. They couldn't be in the same location, otherwise a fight to the death would happen. I'd always try to keep them separate as best as a 14-year-old kid could. One day I came home and he was gone. Dad said he ran away. Nothing surprising. He always does this. I spent the next 8 hours searching the entire side of town for him. Dad even told me he called up the pound and they hadn't picked him up. I cried for days, thinking my dog was kidnapped or dead. Over the years, things clicked together in my growing mind. My dad took him to the pound himself. About 5-10 years later, I call him out on it. Sure enough, I was right. I still miss that little guy. When I was a kid I had these 2 goldfish, Bubbles and Swimmer. I loved those two. I would have my mom carry their bowl into the living room so they could watch TV with me. I used to reach into the tank and pet them. I saved all of my money to upgrade them into a tank, and I had them for several years. Sometimes, these fish would get sick. You know, maybe they couldn't swim anymore, only floated on the top. Every time this happened, my mom would take them to the vet, and he always fixed them so they could swim again. Sometimes they came back a different color. Black spots? Oh, just the medication the vet put on his scales. It took me until high school to realize my beloved goldfish in my tank weren't the same ones I brought home in kindergarten. I gotta say, I think this is genius. I know it's not really right to lie to your children, but explaining death to a small child is really hard. They will unfortunately learn eventually, but this method kinda prolongs it a little more. Also, I remember when my first fish died, not only was I terribly sad, but after we flushed it I refused to use that toilet for several days. When I was 8 years old my mom got married and my family moved into a new house with my stepdad. He hung an ollie painting in the living room with a man in a boat on a lake. A couple months later I noticed that the man and the boat were no longer in the painting. I asked my stepdad about it and he said there was never a man and a sailboat. Fast forward a few more months, I noticed the painting once again had the man in the sailboat. I asked my stepdad about it and he said it always had the sailboat. I was baffled. It wasn't until years later that we were moving years later that I discovered the truth. My stepdad had 2 very similar paintings, one with a sailboat and a man and one without them. A couple times a year he would switch the paintings out just to frick with me. It's something we both laugh about now, but for a while I was really pissed at him. For years I thought there was something supernatural about that painting. Turns out my stepdad was just kind of a funny butthole. Yay for a story that doesn't involve your sociopathic parent offing your beloved family pet. Also, LOL. My dad said that my pet hermit crabs ran away while I was at summer camp. He had actually just forgot to feed them. For years, I thought that they had run off to form some sort of runaway hermit crab colony where they would finally be free of their bonds of oppression. Viva la cravolution. I always loved digging for dinosaur bones as a kid. Never found any though, until one day I was digging around in my backyard and found some. I thought it was the coolest thing. When I was 12 or so, my mom told me that my grandmother had saved dried out chicken bones and they buried them for me. Up until then I always wondered why we weren't trying rich for my archaeological discovery. AWW, that's actually very sweet. D. I stayed with my mother after returning from living abroad for a month. She has a hobby farm with cows. One in particular was amazingly friendly and would follow you around the yard when you'd walk outside. His name was Corky. I came home from school one weekend. We made steaks, and as you can probably tell, we ate him. My mom said, "How does Corky taste?" I seriously did not eat beef for about 2 years after that. Thanks mom. My dad did almost the exact same thing to my little sister. When I was a child I caught my mother putting money under my pillow for the tooth fairy. She immediately told me that the tooth fairy couldn't make it that day and asked her to do it in her place. I believed this until I saw her putting all the presents out for Santa and she used the exact same story. Parents told me that my uncle was murdered because his friend at a rival company was jealous of my uncle's financial success. This was when I was 12. Found out 2 years ago that in actuality my uncle was sleeping with his friend's wife. I'm now 27. Once, when I lived at my grandparents', a cat turned up, snuck under the house and gave birth to a litter of kittens. No pics. I was a cameraless kid at the time. Eventually cat got hit by a truck and we found the kittens. And I was thrilled to have 4 tiny fluffy little cat babies to play with. Shortly after the kittens disappeared and I was told they ran away. 10 years later I brought it up and my grandma cracked up and said no. I left them on the doorstep of the vet because they were so young. TLDR. Kittens. ETA. Visited the grandparents and got the rest of the story. My imagination must have inserted the doorstep part because she told me she dropped them off at the vet and followed them up a few months later. Apparently all was sold. Who knows how true that last part was? Well, at least they didn't do the classic put them in a loaded bag and drop them down the drink. Mom used to tell me we couldn't have cats because she hated them. Turns out a kitten had crawled into the engine area of the car and while we were driving away it got run through the engine and slung out the back of the car and she saw it. I kind of don't blame her anymore. I had a dog that supposedly ran away. Turned out my dad took him to the back 40 and shot him because he was a pain in the butt. Exact same thing happened to me when I was about 8. My dad took my dog hunting and he ran away. Found out years later my dad shot him. You're right. Dads can be a pain in the butt. I had a pet rabbit that I adored as an 11-year-old girl that my family and I adopted from a local farm. His name was Blackie, and he was the sweetest, most fun little guy you could imagine. We even had epic wanderings to find him dandelions and whatnot, because I researched that rabbits like that. 2 years after adopting him, enter my idiot cousin, who left Blackie's pen open one summer night after she played with him. The next morning, my mom told me Blackie ran away. The truth is, a dog got into his open hutch and ate him. My mom found his legs and bits of fur amidst the hutch, and cleaned it up before I woke up for cheerleading practice. She didn't tell me about Blackie's real fate until I was in college. I was shocked, but as an adult, I understood why she would do it. I probably would have had a nervous 13-year-old breakdown, then beaten the living bejesus out of my cousin. BTW, my cousin is still considered one of the raging idiots in my moron-filled clutch of family members. TLDR. Mum tells me beloved pet rabbit ran away. In reality my cousin left the top hatch of his cage open and he was eaten by a dog. I had a rabbit named Blackie too. He was sweet. I loved him as soon as he peed on my little sister's lap. I built a skatepark in my front yard when I was 13. A really decent one too. Made from blueprints. I came home from school to see most of it was missing. My dad said someone must have stole it. I then later found out he sold it to some kids a few miles from my house. My mother told me my biological father had been cheating on her. She took me as far away from him as possible. Decades later found out it was actually the other way around. by a lot. I freaking hate people who manipulate the truth to make themselves look good and someone innocent look bad. My funny Catholic uncle wanted to let God do the healing after my grandpa had a heart attack and needed quintuple bypass surgery. As a result, he was disowned from the family for a good 4 years in which nobody saw or heard from him or his family. Turns out he was in jail for smuggling pot into the country. When I was a kid, I had 2 baby chickens as pets that had died. I came home from school and they were gone. My mom just said they flew to America to meet us there. We were living in Kuwait at the time, but as a family were working towards moving to California. How did they die, you ask? Well, these chicks were sold by street vendors. Basically they were dipped into buckets of colorful paint. Mine were red and then put on a hot metal plate with a heat source underneath and ledges to fence them in. Music would play from the boombox next to them as they would hop and rotate their feet on the hot plate since they couldn't fly or get off. They were sold as dancing rainbow chicks. How could I not want them as a child? Anyway, after you buy them, they apparently die a few days later, after failing to dance at home mind you, cause the paint they were dipped in dries in their nostrils and suffocates them, and maybe poisons them too. Not sure. It would all be hilarious if it wasn't so heinous. As a child, I had a fascination with walking down to the river, locating the largest bullfrog possible, and bringing it back home with me, where I would select an appropriate sized pan from the kitchen, put some water in it and place the frog in the water-filled pan, in the garden, with no lid. My mother didn't appreciate it. I could never figure out why there were so many pancakes frogs on the street behind our house, and then I did. I had a pet duck for a few years when I was younger. One day I came home from school to no duck and my parents told me it had died and was already on the way to a special pet graveyard in a country I couldn't visit. So I assumed my dead duck was in the bin or something, and grieved for it. A few months ago I found out that one day my duck had gotten into the house, pooped all over our dining room, and so my mother lured it into a laundry basket and set it free in the nearest canal. I still don't understand why she didn't just say it had flown away or something. Why did she have to say it was dead? Totally thought you were going to say lured it into a laundry basket and set it on fire. When I was little, I thought marriages only counted when you had the big party with the big white dress and a priest and such. So when I asked my parents why my aunt and uncle weren't married for real, they just said that they loved each other and their hearts a lot, and that's all that mattered. A couple years ago I found out that it was because my uncle was dating the daughter of a drug kingpin and banging my now aunt on the side, and got my aunt pregnant. So they had to get married for the American citizenship and elope so they wouldn't get murdered. TLDR. Parents told me my uncle and aunt didn't get married because they loved each other when in reality, they got married to avoid getting murdered. My tale of tragedy is similar to that of the OP. When I was around 5 or 6, my aunt bought a giant fish at the market. It was so fresh, it was actually alive. I wouldn't allow her to slaughter it, so I filled up the tub with water and kept it there for what I thought were days or even weeks. It was probably just a few hours. Time is different when you are a kid. I played with it and was so happy. I must have taken a nap or something, only to wake up and find my treacherous and murderous parents and aunt gnawing away at my friend. I must have understood what happened, as their weak attempts of denial, begging for my forgiveness, and promises of substitute friends or riches had no effect on my attitude towards them till this very day. We found a feral cat we called Minu that attacked my sister and hurt her really badly. Mum gave us a big line about putting Minu to sleep with chloroform and peaceful deaths for dangerous animals, blah blah blah. What actually happened, I found out decades later, was Dad crushed its skull with a hammer. Then, a week later he read in the local rag that there was a rabies epidemic. Any animals that attacked or behaved oddly should be brought to the CSPCA. Dad calls and says, "What if the cat is dead? That's okay. They test the brains. They only need the head. What if the head is damaged?" I still can't believe he didn't get in crap with them for that one. When I was about 4, I opened the fridge to discover a pitcher of delicious blue Kool-Aid. When I asked my Kool-Aid sipping dad if I could have some, he told me no, because it was made with tap water, which was poisonous to children. We usually drank our water from the fridge. He denies this ever happened, but I will never forget his flagrant Kool-Aid hogging lies. Never. Dad gave me a drug talk when I was in middle school. Said he'd never smoked pot and we signed some contract provided by Dare. A couple decades later, taking a road trip with him, he tells me about the amazing dope he used to smoke with his college friends at Patriots games. He also told me on that trip he was juggling another girl when he first was dating my mom. TMI, Dad. Well, I've never smoked dope or juggled girls either. RIP Dad. I have a twin brother. We were born around a month too early, and my mom had to have a C-section. But we were very healthy. At family gatherings, whenever the story of our birth was touched upon, things would kind of go quiet and the subject would change. And my brother and I were told that our parents were so lucky to have us. We always thought it was because my mom was older, so it was a riskier pregnancy, or the fact that we were sideways in the womb. But a year ago we put the pieces together and it became abundantly clear. Upon birth, my brother was significantly larger than me. It turns out my mother had to induce labor to prevent my twin brother from starving me to death in utero. What a sucker. Poor goat. I had goldfish named Happy and Birthday. They mysteriously disappeared one day. But probably the worst thing was when my puppy died. We'd only had him for a year, but he really wasn't that bright. I came home from school one day and couldn't find him, so I asked my stepdad, who told me that Teddy had gotten hit by a car. 10 years later, my mom confessed that he had actually drowned in the pool. He had a habit of tossing his ball around to entertain himself. I guess one day it fell in the pool, and he jumped in to get it. That particular day, the ladder wasn't in the pool, and he couldn't get out. They didn't tell me out of fear I'd never swim in the pool again. I really hope this doesn't get buried. A friend of mine has the same exact name as his father. He grew up thinking that it was a family tradition to name the firstborn son after the dad. Turns out my friend's dad was an alcoholic who was drunk at his son's birth. When it came time to sign my friend's new name on his birth certificate, his dad thought they were asking for a signature. Ergo, they have the same name. This happened to a guy I knew. The mother wasn't drunk. She just wrote her name in the wrong place when he was born and didn't realize until much later. Somehow, his name was legally Karen until he was about 10. When I was a kid, I used to have this horrible shirt with a hole in it that had a cartoon flower pot on the front. It was really ratty, but it was my favorite, and I would steal it out of the laundry hamper so I could wear it every day. My mother didn't like this because I had so many other nice shirts that I refused to wear. One day I was choosing my outfit to coordinate with my favorite flower pot shirt, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I went to my mother, who said she thought the garbage man stole it. Obviously this was quick thinking by my mother, as the garbage truck was just going by. I stood on my porch yelling at the garbage truck as it drove by, shouting the meanest things my 4-year-old self knew. I don't remember how I found out that my mom threw out the shirt, but I do remember not talking to my mom for a day or two, and her laughing at my ridiculousness. Every single year for Easter, my wife, when she was a kid, would get a pet rabbit, because the one from the year before had to go live at the zoo. And every year her grandmother serves rabbit for Easter. They would even go so far to have another family member call the house on Easter to say how well the rabbit was doing at the zoo. So to the OP, my wife can relate. Well, at least the rabbit didn't go to waste and they got a cute new bunny every year. When I was little, my parents always told me that I had 2 grandmas, but only 1 grandpa. I found out years and years later by searching on the internet that it wasn't true. Turns out, I have a 2nd grandpa, but he has been in jail my entire life. Better than the alternative. You really have only 1 grandpa and your parents are half siblings. I grew up in a rural area in Kentucky. I had a lab mix named Bailey. When I was about 8, my aunt and uncle were visiting. They took me out shopping one day, and when I got back, Bailey was missing. It happened every once in a while, so I shrugged it off. During dinner, we all heard a faint scratching at the door. It was Bailey. I ran to the door with my brother and let her in. Thing is, she was covered in blood and was limping. My father grabbed his shotgun and shot her. Turns out, my dad got tired of taking care of her, so he decided to kill her with a sledgehammer. Thing is, She didn't die. I have plenty of other crappy pet stories if you'd like to hear. That is horrifying. I wasn't terribly bothered when my dad had to put animals down with shotguns, but bludgeoning and then shooting it right in front of you is a lot much. When I was about 8 we had this awful goat named Leeroy. It would attack the other animals and caused lots of destruction on our property. We couldn't allow my 2-year-old brother to go outside because the goat would immediately attack him. One day I noticed that Leeroy was missing and I found my father in the kitchen butchering some sort of animal. "Is that Leeroy?" I asked him. "No, we gave Leeroy away. This is a sheep," he responded. I watched him suspiciously for several minutes before I left the room muttering, "Looks like Leeroy to me." That phrase has been our family's method of calling bulls ever since. This needs more upvotes. Also, my family will definitely wonder when I start saying "looks like Leeroy to me" to call BS. We were poor and kept chicken and rabbits in our backyard, so we can eat. I knew that we ate the chickens, but I never found out until later why our rabbits vanished. When I did find out, that was it. I never ate that again. For a long time I didn't realize that the chicken I ate in nugget form were the same animal as chickens on farms. I was very shocked when I made the connection. I started developing around the age of 11. At 14, I noticed something. My sister was a C cup and mom was a DD, but I was barely a B. When I asked mom about this, she told me to look at your sister and I. They'll grow. At 16, not much had changed in the breast area, so I asked again. Mom's reply had changed. "Oh, I had a boob job after you were born. The doctor went through the armpits so I don't have any scars. Your sister just got lucky. If you really want some, I'll buy you some when you're older." I decided to be happy with what I have. I almost expected this to be a "you were adopted" story. When I was about 6 my family dropped me off at my grandparents' house saying they had to go to the supermarket and should be back soon. They came back about a week later. They had gone to Vegas. Whoa, it's like a typical family pet story, but you were the pet. I caught a shrew mouse when I was a little kid. Was the cutest little thing ever. I proudly brought it home and built it a nice little terrarium where it could chill. The next day it was gone. My parents told me it had escaped, but after a while I found out that they released it back into the wild. I never forgave this treachery. Well, it's not like they put it in a stew. They gave it freedom. This one isn't as scarring as the original, but funny nonetheless. My mom is kind of an evil genius when it comes to punishments and manipulation. When I say manipulation, I mean the harmless kind. What exactly does that mean? I'll explain. Every Christmas, my mom would tell my sister and I that she hid an ornament on the Christmas tree, and if we found it, we'd get an extra gift that wasn't under the tree. So of course, we'd go and grab every ornament off the tree and show it to my mom. "Is it this one?" "Nope." "Go put it in the box." "This one?" "Nope." When we finally did find it, she'd bust out the secret gift, which was usually a VHS of whatever Disney movie had just been released. It wasn't until years later that I realized the secret ornament was always the last fricking ornament that we took off the tree. Every fricking time. I was genuinely upset a little bit that I could be so easily manipulated, and then horrified that my mother would think of that, then impressed that my mom thought of that. I have yet to move on to the next stage. TLDR. Odds of getting 2 5-year-olds to dismantle your Christmas tree by asking them 0%. Odds of getting 2 5-year-olds to dismantle your Christmas tree by tricking them into thinking it's a game and they'll get something out of it they wouldn't have otherwise 100%. I am going to remember this trick for the future me. I grew up in Idaho and was raised loving Jake Plummer, a mediocre quarterback that grew up and went to high school in Boise, and later was in the NFL for a few seasons. While my sister was in middle school attending a basketball camp at Capitol High, Plummer's high school, he showed up and signed autographs for her. They told me that night, and in a fit of excitement I begged her to take my brand new football and get him to sign it. The next night I got my football back signed and all. I wouldn't let anyone touch it or play with it. Years later my sister let slip that they couldn't find him the next day, so my mom just forged his signature. I wasn't ever really upset because now I got to play with my awesome football. Plus super mom points for pulling that one off. Separate story. My GF had a miniature pinscher when she was 9 that they owned for a couple years. One day the dog ran away and was never seen again. Turns out her mom decided one day that she didn't like the dog and drove it a city over and just dropped it off in the street and left. 12 years later, just this last year, her mom confessed to the family. I really don't like her mom. In elementary school I came out of the shower and my mom handed me a towel with dark red splotches on it. I told her the towel was dirty and she said it was just makeup. Years later I realized it was her dried period blood. Freaking B. Somewhat related. Saw a towel covered in a lot of blood. My mom told me that my sister had unexpectedly gotten her period. Found out later it was a suicide attempt. I had a pet tarantula when I was around 10. My mom absolutely hated it, but I thought it was awesome watching it eat crickets and other bugs. One day I come home from school and it is dead, with crickets eating at it. My mom told me that she accidentally put too many in there and they just zerged down my spider. I found out a couple of months ago that she in fact poisoned it to death. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.